David thought he knew his wife Alina until she opened their marriage and used it to secretly sleep with her sister's husband, Eric. What began as a twisted betrayal turned into a calculated trap, and by the time Natalie, Eric's unsuspecting wife, learned the truth, David had already set the stage for the ultimate revenge inside a motel room neither of them would ever forget. David believed he had everything a man could ask for: a stable job, a lovely home in a quiet neighborhood, and a wife who seemed caring and supportive. He and Alina had been married for 6 years. Their routines were simple: morning coffees, shared dinners, occasional weekend trips. They didn't fight much. If anything, their marriage felt calm, maybe too calm. Looking back, David would realize that the stillness wasn't peace, it was distance hiding in comfort. It started one evening when Alina came home from a work retreat, talking about how couples these days were exploring new ideas to deepen trust and communication. She mentioned friends who had opened their marriages and how it actually made them feel closer. David listened, confused but open-minded. She said she loved him, that she wanted to explore but not destroy what they had. At first, he laughed it off, thinking she was joking. But days later, she brought it up again, this time more seriously. Alina painted it as a modern decision, not a sign of dissatisfaction. She said it wasn't about cheating, it was about evolving, about embracing change instead of fighting it. David didn't know what to think. His instincts screamed that something was wrong, but he had no proof, no reason to suspect anything other than what she told him. So, against his better judgment, he agreed. Maybe she was right. Maybe a change could strengthen their bond. He loved her, and trust, he thought, was part of love. The rules were discussed: discretion, honesty, safety. They even signed up for a private couples app where like-minded people could connect. But something felt off from the beginning. Alina seemed a little too excited, a little too prepared. She quickly set up her profile, spent hours scrolling, and even started going out more often. When David brought up the idea of meeting someone himself, she brushed it off, saying she was still adjusting and that it might be better if only one of them tried it first. Soon, weekends became her escape. She would claim she needed time for herself, or that she was meeting friends from the app. David, still clinging to trust, stayed quiet. But each time she left, a cold silence would settle over the house. Her behavior began to change. She was less affectionate, less engaged, and strangely defensive if he asked too many questions. Her phone was suddenly locked. She had new clothes, a new perfume, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. David told himself not to overthink. He blamed himself for feeling uneasy. Maybe he wasn't adjusting well to this new setup. Maybe he was too traditional, too rigid. He tried to distract himself, to believe that everything was fine, but deep inside, something was breaking, a quiet, gnawing doubt that refused to leave. What he didn't know then was that Alina wasn't exploring a new lifestyle with strangers. She was already deeply involved with someone she wasn't allowed to want, someone who would make the betrayal feel far worse than he could ever imagine. A few weeks after their marriage had opened, David found himself living in uncertainty. Alina seemed lighter, happier, but also more secretive. She spent more time away from home, giving vague explanations that didn't add up. She claimed she was meeting people from the app, but David never saw messages or notifications. Whenever her phone lit up, she would tilt the screen away or silence it. What disturbed him most was how quickly things had changed. Alina's warmth toward him had faded. Their conversations became shallow, their connection weaker. The woman he once knew seemed to be disappearing before his eyes. Then came the annual family dinner. It was a tradition. Alina's sister Natalie and her husband Eric would visit, and the four of them would spend the weekend together. David had always liked Eric. He was confident, charismatic, and had a way of making people feel at ease. They'd bonded over sports and drinks in the past, but this time, something felt different. Eric seemed a little too comfortable. His jokes were sharper, his eyes wandered more, and there was an awkward energy that wasn't there before. During dinner, David noticed subtle interactions between Alina and Eric, At first, he thought he was imagining it. A quick glance, a shared laugh that seemed too private, the way Eric stood just a little too close when helping Alina clear the table. It wasn't obvious, but once David started noticing, it became hard to ignore. Even Natalie, usually upbeat and talkative, seemed slightly withdrawn that evening, sipping her wine in silence while the others chatted. Later that night, while everyone relaxed in the living room, David saw Alina and Eric step outside for a cigarette. Neither of them smoked. He waited, listening carefully, but they came back minutes later, laughing and brushing off invisible tension. It felt off, like something had happened that they weren't addressing. David's chest tightened, but he told himself he was being paranoid. After all, this was his wife and her brother-in-law. There was no way anything inappropriate could be happening between them. It was unthinkable. Still, the feeling lingered. Over the next few days, David became more alert. He began noticing how often Eric's name came up in casual conversation with Alina. She would mention his advice, his texts, his sense of humor. She even defended him during a mild argument about politics. Something she never used to do. It felt like the boundaries had blurred, and every time David tried to bring it up, Alina changed the subject or dismissed his concern as overthinking. David didn't have proof, but his instincts had shifted from uneasy to alarmed. Something wasn't right, and the signs were adding up. He couldn't shake the image of Alina and Eric on the porch, laughing like co-conspirators. As the weekend ended and the guests left, a strange silence returned to the house. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, a warning he hadn't yet fully understood. What felt like a strange coincidence was the beginning of something far more devastating. David just didn't know how deep the betrayal would go. Days turned into weeks, but David couldn't shake the uneasiness that had taken root after the family dinner. Alina continued her pattern of late nights, sudden outings, and quiet absences. She no longer offered explanations, and David stopped asking. Every question was met with irritation or deflection. He told himself not to jump to conclusions, but the strange feeling in his chest grew heavier with time. It was a quiet Thursday evening when David noticed something odd while organizing receipts for their monthly expenses. Alina usually handled the finances, but she'd left a folder on the dining table. As he sorted through restaurant bills and fuel charges, a pattern began to emerge. There were multiple transactions from a small, rundown motel on the outskirts of town, each one charged under a different name but all paid using their joint account. The dates aligned too closely with the weekends she had claimed to be meeting friends or needing space. His hands began to tremble as he examined the records. It was the kind of motel known for discretion, not comfort. David couldn't imagine his wife booking such a place unless she was trying to hide something. A chill ran down his spine as he recalled Eric's visit. The strange looks, the private conversations, the energy he couldn't explain. He began to wonder if these visits to the motel had anything to do with Eric, or if Alina had taken the idea of an open marriage as a cover for something far worse. The next day, David took a personal day from work. He drove to the motel without a plan, parking across the street and observing from a distance. It was the middle of the day, quiet and unremarkable. He waited until a few guests left before going in under the pretense of needing a room. The clerk at the front desk was a tired-looking man who barely glanced up. David casually asked if a woman matching Alina's description had stayed recently, pretending to be her husband and concerned for her safety. The clerk flipped through a logbook and nodded. He remembered her, but said she usually arrived with someone else. When David asked who, the man shrugged and mentioned a different name each time. None of them real, but one receipt stood out. It had been signed by someone using Eric's initials. David's breath caught in his throat. It was a confirmation he hadn't wanted, but had feared. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. Alina had been meeting Eric at that motel. The one place no one would look. The betrayal was real, and it was happening right under the family's nose. The discovery at the motel haunted David in the days that followed. Every time he saw Alina, he felt like he was looking at a stranger. Her smiles seemed forced, her laughter too loud. She moved about their home like nothing was wrong. But David could no longer play along. The carefully constructed world they'd built together was crumbling, piece by piece, and all he could do was wait. David knew he needed more than just motel receipts and the clerk's vague memory to confront Alina and Eric. What he had wasn't enough to expose the truth. He needed undeniable proof, something that would strip away any possibility of denial. For the next few days, he focused on Alina's routine, observing her habits and movements with a keen eye. She'd become more erratic, her phone always within arm's reach, her eyes darting nervously whenever David was near it. He had never noticed how much she'd been hiding until now, and it ate at him. One evening, after Alina had gone to bed, David stayed up, going through the files on their old laptop. He knew it was a long shot, but he had to try. Alina had always kept backups of everything, from photos to documents, and as he dug through folders, he found what he was looking for. There, buried beneath old family photos and travel itineraries, was an email account he'd never seen before. It was attached to an encrypted file, something he knew she used to keep private information hidden. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard, the weight of his decision sinking in, but in the end he couldn't stop himself. David cracked the password. It took a few attempts, but eventually, the screen unlocked. What he found inside made his stomach churn. Dozens of messages exchanged between Alina and Eric, spanning months. At first, it was innocent enough. Texts about their families, casual exchanges about gatherings. But as the weeks passed, the tone shifted. The messages grew more intimate, more personal, and then disturbingly, they became graphic. David's heart pounded in his chest as he scrolled through the conversations. They spoke about their secret meetings, their stolen moments together in the motel, and how they couldn't wait to be alone again. There were plans to continue their affair, even after David had agreed to the open marriage. The most crushing part wasn't just the affair, it was the way Alina spoke about him. She had mocked him in their messages, calling him naive, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate him into agreeing to their open marriage. There was even one message where she and Eric joked about how much fun they were having at his expense. The betrayal was deeper than David could have ever imagined. He wasn't just a fool, he had been used, made a pawn in their game. The email account also contained photos, intimate pictures taken during their clandestine meetings at the motel. David's hands shook as he clicked through the files. There they were, his wife and his brother-in-law, caught in the most vulnerable moments. The images made everything feel real in a way nothing else had. It wasn't just an affair, it was a carefully constructed plan to deceive and humiliate him. As David sat back, a bitter sense of finality washed over him. He had the proof now, the irrefutable evidence that would shatter everything. His world was no longer a lie, it was something far worse, a cruel game of manipulation. But it wasn't over yet. The truth would be exposed, and when it was, there would be no going back. David felt hollow in the days that followed his discovery. The shock had worn off, replaced by a quiet, simmering rage. But it wasn't the kind of anger that burned wildly, it was cold, focused, and deliberate. He didn't want to confront Alina in a screaming match. He didn't want tears or excuses. What he wanted was to make her and Eric feel exactly what he had felt, powerless, betrayed, humiliated. But revenge, he knew, required patience. He began with a plan. He needed to strike from the shadows, just as they had done to him. No warnings, no clues, only consequences. So David created a fake identity online. A man named Mark, complete with a polished profile, professional headshots, and a backstory carefully crafted to appeal to someone like Alina. He listed interests she once claimed to admire, adventurous relationships, privacy, and excitement. Then, using the same app she had used to explore their so-called open marriage, David sent her a message. To his surprise, and yet not, Alina responded quickly. Her tone was playful, flirtatious, and daring. She didn't recognize him, David had digitally altered the photos just enough to make the face believable but unfamiliar. Alina fell into the trap without hesitation, and within days she was confiding in Mark, telling him about her life, her marriage, and her fantasies. She claimed her husband had become distant, cold, and emotionally absent. David read every word in silence, each sentence cutting deeper than the last. While continuing his online conversations with Alina, David also created a second identity, a woman named Alina, designed to appeal to Eric. He used the same tactics, a fake profile, a few attractive photos, and a narrative that made Alina seem like the perfect secret escape. Eric, just like Alina, took the bait quickly. He replied eagerly, speaking about the stress in his marriage and how he needed someone who understood him. It was almost laughable. Both of them, lying to their spouses, playing victim, completely unaware they were talking to the same man. Over the next couple of weeks, David kept the conversations going. He used them to extract information, record details, and set the stage for what came next. He led both of them to believe they were finally meeting someone who understood their secret lives, someone they could trust, and once they were hooked, he set the trap. David suggested a private, intimate meeting with both of them at different times and under different pretenses. He told Alina that Mark wanted to meet at a discreet motel outside of town, far from any prying eyes. He told Eric the same through Lena. Neither suspected a thing. They confirmed the same date, the same location. Everything was falling into place. David booked the room under a fake name and planted hidden cameras, making sure everything was recorded. He placed printed copies of their messages, emails, and photos inside a folder on the motel nightstand. It was a stage prepared for revelation, and David was the director. The time for watching and waiting was nearly over. The moment of reckoning was only a few hours away, and they would never see it coming. The day of the meeting arrived, and David moved with quiet precision. He had rehearsed every part of the plan in his head, going over the details again and again to make sure nothing could go wrong. The motel room had already been booked 2 days in advance under the name Mark. He chose the same motel that Alina and Eric had used countless times, knowing the setting itself would drive the final nail in. He arrived early that morning, hours before anyone else was due, carrying with him a small black duffel bag filled with everything he needed: camera equipment, chargers, documents, and copies of all the messages and photos. Inside the room, David set up 2 small hidden cameras, one placed discreetly behind the television and another in the corner of the room, angled perfectly toward the bed and entrance. He tested both feeds using a connected laptop and made sure they were recording with sound. On the nightstand, he left a thick folder neatly labeled Truth. Inside were the screenshots of every incriminating text, every explicit photo, and even printed receipts from the motel's logbook. The final page was a copy of Alina's email logging history, proving she had used this very laptop to write to Eric. Once everything was in place, David took a final look around the room. The air was heavy with anticipation. He could feel the weight of what was about to unfold pressing against his chest, but there was no turning back. This wasn't about winning or vengeance anymore. It was about closure, about ending something that had already died long ago. Alina was scheduled to arrive first. Through her messages with Mark, David had asked her to come early to get comfortable and prepare for an unforgettable experience. She responded with eagerness and even sent a message that morning confirming she was on her way. At exactly 4:50, her car pulled into the lot. David watched through the window of a vacant room across the lot, heart pounding but hands steady. She walked into the room dressed carefully, as if trying to impress someone. Her eyes scanned the room, and when she saw the folder on the table, she paused. Curiosity led her to open it. Her expression changed instantly. Confusion turned to shock, and then to fear. She clutched the pages in her hands, flipping through them faster and faster, her breathing quickening. 10 minutes later, Eric arrived. He knocked on the door expecting Lena. Alina opened it. The look on both their faces said it all: complete confusion, quickly replaced by panic. Before either could react, David stepped into the room silently, camera still recording. He said nothing. There was no need. His presence and the evidence laid bare before them said everything. Alina tried to speak, but David held up his hand and placed a small USB drive on the nightstand next to the folder. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving them alone with their disgrace. As the door closed behind him, it wasn't victory David felt, it was finality. The truth had finally caught up with the lies. David walked away from the motel with slow, deliberate steps, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The confrontation hadn't involved shouting, accusations, or emotional breakdowns, only silence and the undeniable presence of truth. He didn't need to scream to make them feel small. The evidence he left behind had done all the speaking for him. What Alina and Eric had thought was a hidden affair, protected by lies and secrecy, was now completely exposed in the very place they used to hide. He didn't go home that night. Instead, David checked into a small hotel in a different part of the city. He sat alone in the dimly lit room, watching the videos from the motel cameras, not out of vengeance, but to confirm everything had been captured. The recordings showed Alina's shock as she flipped through the folder, her confusion as she stared at the printed conversations. Eric's arrival and the moment he realized he had been caught were crystal clear. His stunned silence, the guilt on his face, and the way he avoided looking at her. Together they stood frozen in the motel room, broken by their own actions. David saved the footage to a secure drive and encrypted the files. He wasn't planning to use them publicly, but he needed them to protect himself from any future lies. He also copied the emails, texts and photos into a separate folder and sent it through an anonymous email to Natalie, Alina's sister and Eric's wife. He didn't write a message. There were no explanations, just the truth. By morning, Natalie had seen everything. Within hours, she called David. He didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The truth had been delivered, and now it would run its course. David knew that her world had just been shattered, much like his had been weeks earlier. The difference was that she hadn't seen it coming at all. For her, the betrayal wasn't just from a spouse, it was from her own sister. A double blow that cut deeper than any single affair ever could. The fallout began immediately. Natalie filed for divorce. Family members started asking questions. Alina, unable to control the narrative, vanished from social media and began working remotely. Eric moved out of the home he had shared with Natalie, his reputation among friends and relatives in ruins. Whispers of the scandal traveled quickly through their circle, though no one knew the full story. Only David, Natalie, and the two betrayers knew just how deeply the deception had gone. But David didn't chase drama or seek validation. He disappeared from their lives quietly. He packed his belongings, sold the house, and moved to a new city. No announcements, no explanations, just distance. He deleted the fake accounts, erased every message, and archived the evidence in a secure folder never to be opened again. What he left behind wasn't just a ruined marriage, it was the full weight of accountability crashing down on two people who believed they were untouchable. David didn't need to destroy them, they did it themselves. He simply held up the mirror and walked away. Months passed, and life moved forward, but nothing returned to how it once was. The storm had come and gone, leaving behind broken homes, fractured relationships, and a silence that lingered longer than the chaos. David had settled into a small apartment in a quiet coastal town, far from the noise, far from the memories. The air was different there, calm, salty, clean. It gave him space to think, to breathe, and most importantly to rebuild. Not the same life he had before, but something new, something untouched by betrayal. Alina tried reaching out a few times in the weeks following the motel confrontation. Emails arrived with desperate subject lines. One was titled, "Please," another, "Let's talk." David never opened them. He deleted each message without a second thought. He didn't need apologies or explanations. He had already heard the truth in her silence at the motel. Everything he needed to know had been laid bare in those messages she never expected him to see. She had made her choices freely. Now she could live with them. He heard from mutual friends, indirectly, that Alina had left town too. She moved in with a cousin returnally before renting a small apartment. Her job had grown awkward, people whispered, and the tension followed her through every hallway. Eric, too, had lost everything. Natalie's divorce was swift and absolute. She had cut ties with him entirely, moved states with her children, and changed her number. Eric's family distanced themselves, and his once thriving real estate business collapsed under the weight of the scandal. Clients pulled out, and his reputation, once spotless, was now toxic. David never gloated. He never told his side of the story. He allowed others to speculate and let the two responsible explain themselves or not. He found strength in his silence. The truth didn't need to be paraded. It had already done what it needed to do. There were nights, of course, when the past returned. A certain song, a photograph tucked in a forgotten drawer, or the sudden memory of a laugh that once meant something. But David didn't let those memories consume him. They were pieces of a former life, and he accepted them as just that, past moments, no longer part of his future. Instead of clinging to bitterness, he started focusing on healing. He picked up old hobbies again: photography, reading, hiking through the nearby cliffs. He joined a local community group, met new people, and slowly allowed himself to reconnect with the world. Trust was still fragile, but it was no longer broken. He had learned to guard it wisely, to protect it from those who didn't deserve it. In the end, revenge wasn't what gave David peace. It wasn't the trap, the motel, or the confrontation. It was walking away. It was watching the truth do the damage that lies had delayed for too long. Justice hadn't come in shouts or fists. It had come quietly, through patience, exposure, and the unwavering strength to leave everything behind without looking back. David had survived the storm, and now, finally, he was free.